Jack Thompson was not the kind of man who sought attention. He lived a quiet life, tucked away in the countryside where time seemed to move slower. His days were filled with simple joys, tending to his garden, feeding chickens, and watching the sunrise from the porch of his modest farmhouse. The house itself had been passed down through generations, a gift from his late grandfather who had always dreamed of turning it into something more than just a place to live. For years, Jack had resisted change, content with keeping things as they were. But after losing his job at a factory due to layoffs, he decided it was finally time to make that dream come true. With determination in his heart, Jack transformed the old property into a small organic farm. He planted rows of vegetables, tomatoes, carrots, lettuce, and squash, and built pens for chickens and ducks. The driveway leading up to the house became both a practical path for deliveries and a welcoming entrance for customers who stopped by to buy fresh produce. Jack added charm to the space by planting colorful flower beds along the edges and hanging hand-painted wooden signs that read, "Welcome to Thompson's Farm," and "Fresh veggies ahead." It wasn't much, but it brought him immense pride. Word spread quickly about Jack's little farm. Neighbors from nearby towns began visiting regularly, drawn not only by the quality of his products, but also by the warmth of his hospitality. Children loved petting the animals, while adults appreciated the opportunity to escape the hustle and bustle of city life, even if just for an hour or two. Business picked up steadily, and soon Jack found himself busier than ever before. Life felt good again, like he'd discovered a purpose he didn't know he'd been missing. But trouble loomed on the horizon, though Jack couldn't see it coming. Just beyond his property line lay sprawling fields that developers had recently purchased. They promised to build greenfield estates, a luxurious housing development marketed as the future of suburban living. Construction began swiftly, bringing bulldozers, cranes, and workers who worked tirelessly to erect cookie-cutter mansions with manicured lawns. At first, Jack paid little attention to the commotion. After all, his land had been there long before anyone thought to pave roads or dig foundations. Surely, he reasoned, these newcomers would respect his boundaries. Then came the letter. It arrived one crisp autumn morning, slipped under the door of his farmhouse. The envelope bore the official seal of the Greenfield Estates Homeowners Association, HOA, a group Jack hadn't known existed until now. Inside was a sternly worded notice accusing him of violating community guidelines. Apparently, his farm activities, including the roadside stand and the occasional tractor parked near the driveway, clashed with the HOA's vision of perfection. They demanded he remove the signs, stop selling produce, and cease any operations that might disrupt the aesthetic appeal of their pristine neighborhood. Jack read the letter twice, shaking his head in disbelief. How could this group claim authority over his land? His family had farmed here for decades, long before anyone imagined building fancy houses nearby. Still, he chose to ignore the warning, hoping it was nothing more than a misunderstanding. Surely cooler heads would prevail once the HOA realized how harmless his farm truly was. Little did Jack know, this was only the beginning of a battle that would test his patience, resilience, and ultimately reveal secrets buried deep within his family's past. Days turned into weeks, and still, no response came from the HOA regarding Jack's silence. He continued running his farm as usual, assuming the issue would blow over. But then, one chilly morning, the peace of Thompson's farm was shattered by the deafening roar of machinery. As Jack stepped outside to investigate, his blood ran cold. 3 massive bulldozers sat idling at the edge of his driveway, their yellow bodies gleaming ominously in the early light. Between them stood towering piles of dirt, effectively sealing off access to his property. "What is the meaning of this?" Jack shouted, storming toward the scene. A burly foreman named Carl emerged from behind one of the machines, clipboard in hand. He wore a smug grin as he explained the situation. "The HOA sent us," Carl said casually, as if blocking someone's driveway was the most normal thing in the world. "You've been warned multiple times about your violations. We're here to enforce the rules." Jack stared at him, dumbfounded. "Violations? These are my lands. You can't just barge in and do whatever you want. Carl shrugged, clearly unimpressed. Look, buddy, don't shoot the messenger. If you've got a problem, take it up with the HOA. Until then, this stays right here. With that, he signaled his crew to shut off the engines and climb out of the bulldozers. They leaned against the machines, arms crossed, daring Jack to challenge them further. Fury bubbled inside Jack, but he forced himself to stay calm. Arguing with these men wouldn't solve anything. They were merely following orders. Instead, he marched back inside, grabbed his phone, and dialed the number listed on the HOA's letterhead. After several rings, a snooty voice answered. This is Richard Langley, president of the Greenfield Estates HOA. How may I assist you? Mr. Langley, Jack began, trying to keep his tone steady. Your people have blocked my driveway with bulldozers. This is my property, and I need you to remove them immediately. There was a pause on the other end. When Richard spoke again, his voice dripped with condescension. Mr. Thompson, I'm afraid you misunderstand the situation. Your so-called farm is disrupting the harmony of our community. Unless you comply with our regulations, we will have no choice but to take action. Jack clenched his fists. Take action? You mean trespassing on private property? Because let me remind you, this land has belonged to my family for generations. You have no right to interfere. Richard chuckled dismissively. Oh, please. Everyone knows farmers like you don't understand modern standards. Perhaps you should consider selling your land and moving somewhere less problematic. The call ended abruptly, leaving Jack fuming. He paced the length of his kitchen, wrestling with anger and frustration. Who did these people think they were? Did they honestly believe they could bully him into submission? As he looked out the window at the bulldozers sitting smugly on his driveway, a spark of defiance ignited within him. He wouldn't give up without a fight. Over the next few days, Jack tried every avenue he could think of to resolve the issue peacefully. He wrote letters, made calls, and even visited the local sheriff's office hoping someone would intervene. But each attempt met with dead ends. The HOA held firm in its stance, convinced that their rules outweighed Jack's rights. Meanwhile, rumors began circulating among the residents of Greenfield Estates. Some whispered sympathetically about the farmer whose livelihood was being threatened, while others sided firmly with the HOA, calling Jack stubborn and unreasonable. One evening, as Jack sat alone in his dimly lit kitchen nursing a cup of coffee, he pulled out an old shoebox from the top shelf of his closet. Inside were faded documents and photographs left behind by his grandfather. Flipping through them, he stumbled upon something intriguing, a map detailing vast tracts of land owned by his ancestors. Squinting at the fine print, Jack's eyes widened in shock. Could it be possible? Was there more to his family's history than he'd ever imagined? For the first time since the conflict began, a glimmer of hope flickered in Jack's chest. Unbeknownst to the HOA, they were playing a dangerous game, and Jack was about to change the rules forever. That night, Jack couldn't sleep. His mind raced with questions as he stared at the yellowed map spread across his kitchen table. The document was old, its edges frayed and ink faded, but its contents were clear enough to send chills down his spine. According to the map, his great-grandfather hadn't just owned the modest parcel of land where Jack's farmhouse now stood. He had purchased vast stretches of what was then wild, untamed countryside. Much of this land had been leased or sold off over the decades, but certain key parcels remained in the family's possession. Jack traced his finger along the map, noting familiar landmarks: the winding creek that ran behind his property, the hill where he often watched sunsets, and even the spot where Greenfield Estates now stood. As he studied it more closely, something extraordinary dawned on him. Legally speaking, the HOA and its residents might actually be living on his land. The realization hit like a thunderclap. For years, Jack had assumed his farm was isolated, surrounded by properties owned by others. But if the map was accurate and, it seemed painstakingly detailed, it meant that everything within miles could still belong to him. The thought was overwhelming, How could such a monumental secret have gone unnoticed for so long? Determined to get answers, Jack spent the next few days poring over legal records at the county courthouse. With each passing hour, his suspicions grew stronger. Deeds, titles, and contracts all pointed to one undeniable truth. His ancestors had retained ownership of significant portions of Greenfield County through clever loopholes written into century-old agreements. These clauses ensured that unless explicitly transferred, the land would remain in the Thompson family indefinitely. When Jack finally pieced everything together, he sat back in stunned silence. Not only did he own his own farm, but he also technically held title to the very ground beneath Greenfield Estates, including the pristine lawns, expensive homes, and even the clubhouse where the HOA held its meetings. This revelation changed everything. Armed with irrefutable proof, Jack decided it was time to take action. However, he knew better than to confront the HOA alone. What he needed was someone who understood the intricacies of property law. After some research, he reached out to Clara Bennett, a sharp-witted attorney known for her expertise in real estate disputes. When she agreed to meet him, Jack brought along every document he'd uncovered, laying them out on her desk like pieces of a puzzle. Clara listened intently, occasionally raising an eyebrow as Jack explained the situation. By the time he finished, she leaned back in her chair, clearly impressed. "Jack," she said slowly, "you're sitting on a gold mine. If you play your cards right, you can turn the tables completely." But Clara warned him not to act rashly. The stakes were high, and revealing his hand too soon could lead to complications. Together, they devised a plan. First, they would draft a formal notice informing the HOA of their trespassing violations. Then, depending on how the HOA reacted, they would decide whether to escalate matters further. As Jack left Clara's office, his heart pounded with a mix of excitement and apprehension. For the first time since the conflict began, he felt empowered. But power came with responsibility, and Jack knew he had to tread carefully. Still, one thing was certain: the HOA had no idea what was coming their way. The letter arrived on a Monday morning, slipped under the doors of every homeowner in Greenfield Estates. Written in crisp, formal language, it bore the signature of Clara Bennett and included copies of the deeds proving Jack's ownership. The message was simple yet devastating. The HOA and its residents were occupying land that legally belonged to Jack Thompson. Unless they wanted to face legal consequences, they needed to cease all interference with his farm immediately. At first, Richard Langley dismissed the letter as nonsense. Sitting in his plush leather chair inside the HOA clubhouse, he laughed derisively as he read it aloud to his board members. "This guy honestly thinks he owns the whole county?" he scoffed. What a joke. But laughter quickly turned to unease when other board members began asking questions. Why hadn't anyone checked the property records before approving the development? Was it possible that Jack's claims were legitimate? Doubt crept into the room like a shadow, silencing even the most vocal supporters of the crackdown against Jack. Word spread rapidly among the residents of Greenfield Estates. Within hours, whispers filled the air as neighbors gathered in driveways and coffee shops to discuss the bombshell. Some dismissed it as absurd, others grew visibly nervous. A few bold individuals decided to investigate for themselves, visiting the courthouse to examine the same documents Jack had uncovered. What they found left them shaken. By Wednesday, panic had set in. Homeowners began calling emergency meetings, demanding answers from the HOA. Richard tried to maintain control, insisting that Jack's claim was a bluff designed to intimidate them. But cracks in his composure started showing when reporters caught wind of the story. Journalists descended upon Greenfield Estates, eager to cover the bizarre saga of the farmer who owned everything. Cameras flashed, microphones jutted forward, and headlines screamed about the potential collapse of an entire neighborhood built on shaky legal ground. Amid the chaos, Jack remained calm and composed. He gave no interviews, choosing instead to let the weight of his claim speak for itself. Behind closed doors, however, he worked tirelessly with Clara to prepare for whatever came next. They anticipated lawsuits, protests, and possibly even attempts to discredit him. But Jack refused to back down. Then came the tipping point. During a heated town hall meeting packed with angry residents, Clara presented irrefutable evidence of Jack's ownership. She projected maps, deeds, and historical documents onto a large screen, walking the audience step by step through the legal framework that supported Jack's case. By the end of her presentation, the room fell silent. Even Richard, sweating profusely under the spotlight, struggled to mount a coherent defense. Outside the meeting hall, tempers flared. Protesters marched toward Jack's farm, chanting slogans and carrying signs accusing him of greed and exploitation. In their anger, they vandalized his crops, overturned equipment, and shattered windows in his barn. It was a low blow, but Jack refused to retaliate. Instead, he called the sheriff, who promptly arrested several ringleaders for trespassing and destruction of property. Despite the hostility, Jack never lost sight of his goal, finding a resolution that benefited everyone involved. He realized that while he held all the cards, wielding his power recklessly would only breed resentment. So, with Clara's guidance, he proposed a compromise, one that would allow current homeowners to stay put while ensuring his farm remained untouched. It wasn't going to be easy, but Jack was ready to prove that owning something wasn't about domination. It was about building bridges and fostering understanding. And deep down, he hoped the people of Greenfield Estates would come to see that too. The fallout from Jack's revelation was swift and explosive. News of his ownership claims spread like wildfire, igniting a media frenzy that turned Greenfield County into the center of national attention. Reporters camped outside Jack's farmhouse, eager to capture every detail of the unfolding drama. Television news anchors breathlessly recounted the story during primetime broadcasts, while social media erupted with memes and debates about property rights versus community development. To some, Jack was a hero, a symbol of resistance against corporate greed. To others, he was a villain using legal loopholes to disrupt lives. For the residents of Greenfield Estates, life became unbearable. Neighbors who had once prided themselves on living in an exclusive, harmonious community now found themselves divided. Some homeowners rallied behind Richard Langley, accusing Jack of exploiting technicalities to extort money. Others, however, began questioning whether they truly had the moral high ground. After all, hadn't their luxurious homes been built on land that might not have belonged to them in the first place? As tensions escalated, so did the protests. Groups of angry residents gathered near Jack's farm almost daily, holding signs that read, "Stop greed and respect our homes." Their chants echoed across the fields, disrupting the tranquility Jack had worked so hard to preserve. One evening, things took a darker turn when a mob of protesters stormed onto his property. They trampled his vegetable patches, shattered the windows of his roadside stand, and spray-painted graffiti on his barn doors. Jack watched helplessly as months of labor were destroyed in mere hours. Despite the destruction, Jack refused to respond with violence or aggression. He called the sheriff's department, which sent deputies to disperse the crowd and arrest those responsible for the vandalism. But even as justice was served, the emotional toll weighed heavily on him. For the first time since inheriting the HOA farm, Jack questioned whether fighting back was worth it. Meanwhile, Richard Langley scrambled to salvage what remained of his crumbling authority. Desperate to rally support, he organized a series of emergency meetings at the HOA clubhouse. At one particularly heated session, tempers flared as homeowners argued over how to proceed. Some demanded that Richard step down, blaming him for failing to vet the property records before approving the development. Others insisted on taking Jack to court, hoping a judge would rule in their favor. But cracks in Richard's leadership widened further when documents surfaced, showing that he had ignored warnings about potential title issues before the project began. A whistleblower within the HOA revealed emails proving Richard had prioritized profit over due diligence. The revelation sparked outrage among residents, many of whom felt betrayed by his negligence. Within days, Richard resigned as HOA president, leaving behind a fractured organization struggling to find its footing. Amid the chaos, Jack received unexpected support from unlikely allies. Local farmers, small business owners, and even some Greenfield Estates residents reached out to express solidarity. Many admired his calm demeanor and willingness to seek compromise despite the hostility directed at him. Letters of encouragement poured in, praising Jack for standing up to corporate interests and reminding people of the importance of preserving rural traditions. Encouraged by this show of support, Jack decided to take a bold step. He held a press conference on the steps of the county courthouse, addressing both the media and the public directly. Standing beside Clara Bennett, he calmly explained his position. While he legally owned the land, his goal wasn't to evict anyone or ruin lives. Instead, he proposed a solution that balanced fairness with practicality. "We're all neighbors here," Jack said, his voice steady but sincere. "I don't want to see families lose their homes or communities torn apart. What I do want is respect. For my farm, for my family's legacy, and for the law. If we work together, I believe we can find common ground." His words struck a chord, with many, softening some of the animosity toward him. Though skepticism lingered, there was a growing sense that perhaps a peaceful resolution was still possible. With emotions running high, Jack and Clara knew they needed to act quickly to prevent the situation from spiraling further out of control. Together, they drafted a detailed proposal aimed at bridging the gap between Jack's legal rights and the concerns of Greenfield Estates residents. The plan was simple yet innovative. Current homeowners would be allowed to remain in their houses under revised lease agreements, effectively renting the land from Jack. In return, Jack agreed to invest part of the revenue generated from these leases into improving infrastructure for the entire area. Better roads, enhanced utilities, and expanded recreational facilities. When the proposal was presented during another town hall meeting, reactions were mixed. Some residents balked at the idea of paying rent, arguing that they had already invested heavily in their properties. Others saw it as a lifeline, a chance to keep their homes without facing financial ruin. Slowly but surely, cooler heads prevailed. Recognizing the strength of Jack's legal position and the futility of prolonged resistance, many homeowners reluctantly accepted the deal. Not everyone was willing to cooperate, though. A small faction led by Richard Langley's most vocal supporters vowed to fight Jack in court, convinced they could overturn his claim. But their efforts proved futile. Legal experts reviewed the case and unanimously agreed that Jack's ownership was ironclad. Faced with mounting legal fees and dwindling public sympathy, the holdouts eventually relented, signing the revised lease agreements alongside their neighbors. As the dust settled, Greenfield Estates began to heal. Homeowners adapted to the new arrangement, realizing that paying rent to Jack wasn't as bad as they had feared. Many came to appreciate the improvements he funded, including repaved streets and upgraded water systems. Over time, relationships between Jack and his neighbors improved as well. Former adversaries became acquaintances, and acquaintances sometimes turned into friends. Richard Langley, humiliated and disgraced, quietly moved away, selling his mansion at a loss. His departure marked the end of an era, one defined by arrogance and mismanagement. In his place emerged a new generation of leaders committed to fostering cooperation rather than conflict. For Jack, life returned to a semblance of normalcy, but with exciting new opportunities. With the additional income from the leases, he expanded his farm operations, introducing agritourism ventures like pumpkin patches, hay rides, and weekend workshops on sustainable farming. Families from Greenfield Estates and beyond flocked to Thompson's farm, drawn by its charm and the man behind it. One crisp autumn evening, as Jack stood on his porch watching children laugh and play in the golden sunset, he reflected on how far he'd come. From being just another farmer trying to make ends meet, he had become a symbol of resilience, integrity, and reconciliation. He realized that owning something wasn't about power. It was about connection. And as he gazed out at the thriving community around him, he knew he had succeeded in building something truly meaningful. Months passed, and the once tense atmosphere in Greenfield County began to soften. The scars of conflict slowly faded, replaced by a renewed sense of harmony and cooperation. Jack's farm thrived like never before, becoming not just a source of fresh produce, but also a hub for community gatherings. Families from all over the county, Greenfield estates included, visited regularly, drawn by the charm of Thompson's farm and the man who ran it. Every Saturday morning, Jack set up his roadside stand, its shelves brimming with vibrant fruits and vegetables. Children darted between rows of pumpkins during autumn, searching for the perfect one to carve into jack-o'-lanterns. In winter, visitors bundled up in scarves and gloves to sip hot cocoa while touring the farm on horse-drawn sleigh rides. Spring brought flower festivals where guests could pick bouquets straight from the fields, and summer saw bustling farmers' markets that spilled onto the driveway Jack had fought so hard to protect. But what made Thompson's farm truly special wasn't just its offerings, it was Jack himself. His quiet humility and unwavering kindness endeared him to everyone he met. Whether he was teaching kids how to plant seeds or sharing stories about his grandfather's legacy, Jack radiated warmth and authenticity. Even those who had once opposed him now greeted him with smiles, calling him the heart of Greenfield County. The transformation extended beyond the farm itself. Thanks to the revenue generated from lease agreements, Jack invested heavily in improving life for everyone in the area. Potholes disappeared from roads, streetlights illuminated dark corners, and parks sprouted up where empty lots used to sit. These upgrades fostered a stronger sense of unity among residents, many of whom credited Jack for turning their neighborhood into a place they were proud to call home. One day, as Jack walked through the bustling crowd at his annual harvest festival, he spotted Richard Langley standing awkwardly near the entrance. It had been months since Richard left Greenfield Estates, and seeing him there felt surreal. For a moment, Jack hesitated, unsure whether to approach him. But then Richard caught his eye and nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the unspoken truce between them. Jack decided to take the first step. Walking over, he extended his hand. "Good to see you again, Richard," he said warmly. Richard hesitated before shaking it, his expression guarded but respectful. "You've done well for yourself, Jack," he admitted grudgingly. "I guess I underestimated you." Jack chuckled softly. "We all make mistakes. What matters is learning from them." Their conversation didn't last long, but it marked a turning point. Richard eventually bought a small cottage farther down the road, choosing to live quietly away from the spotlight. Though he and Jack never became close friends, their interactions remained civil, a testament to how far both men had come since their bitter feud. As time went on, Jack continued to balance his roles as a farmer, landlord, and community leader. He hosted workshops on sustainable agriculture, inviting experts to teach locals how to grow food organically. He partnered with schools to create educational programs, giving children hands-on experience tending crops and caring for animals. Every decision he made reflected his belief in collaboration and shared prosperity. Despite his newfound influence, Jack stayed grounded. He still rose early each morning to tend to his fields, finding peace in the rhythm of nature. Watching the sunrise paint the sky in hues of orange and pink reminded him of why he loved this life so much. On one particularly serene evening, Clara Bennett joined him on the porch, sipping lemonade as they watched fireflies dance across the horizon. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "most people would have let this whole thing go to their heads. But you turned it into something beautiful." Jack smiled, leaning back in his chair. "It's funny," he replied. "For years I thought owning land meant having control over it. But now I realize it's the opposite. When you own something, you're responsible for taking care of it and the people who depend on it. That's what makes it worthwhile." Clara nodded, her gaze softening. "Well, whatever your secret is, it's working. Look at everything you've built here." And indeed, when Jack looked around, he saw a thriving community, united by shared values. The HOA no longer existed in its old form. Instead, a collaborative council made up of homeowners and local leaders worked together to address issues fairly and openly. Tensions between farmers and developers eased as both groups recognized the importance of coexistence. As the stars emerged one by one in the night sky, Jack felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had started this journey as an ordinary man fighting to preserve his way of life. Along the way, he discovered extraordinary strength, not just in himself but in the power of forgiveness, understanding, and compromise. Thompson's farm stood as a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, bridges can be built where walls once stood. And as Jack sat there under the vast, starry sky, he knew that his story wasn't just about land or ownership, it was about connection. Because in the end, the true measure of success isn't what you possess, it's the lives you touch along the way.